Good evening, this is What's Going On. I'm Jon Li. Our guest this evening is Terry Whittier, who's been a planning commissioner for the city of Davis. He's also been a planning commissioner for the city of Sunnyvale, which is a charter city. So he's going to compare charter city Sunnyvale with general law city Davis, and we're advocating that Davis become a charter city. Terry, I want to thank you for being on our show.
I feel privileged to be here. There's no point in living life and not being able to pass it on to other people.
So,
do you want me to start with some of my background?
No, I want you to start with what your age is.
Oh, well, I'll be 90 in 4 months, less than 4 months.
So I wanted to tell one story, and then you can start wherever you want.
Okay.
And you know what the story is. But so 15 years ago, Terry and his wife, Jane Ellen, came to Davis. And shortly after that, I was working at a Chamber of Commerce Discover Davis event that was in Mace Ranch. And I worked in a booth where we were giving away sodas to anybody that came by, and I was volunteering, and Terry was volunteering. And it was later in the day, and the ice had melted enough that it was mostly water. And the sodas, some of them floated and some of them didn't. And I had to reach down to get a regular soda, and I looked up at him and I said, "This one's got more sugar, so much that it sinks. And the one that's diet doesn't have any sugar in it, and it floats." And Terry said, "Specific density."
Gravity.
Gravity, I got it wrong. Anyway, the point is, I said, "What do you do?" And he said, "Well, I used to be an electrical engineer, a nuclear engineer at Cape Canaveral, and then I was a kindergarten teacher." And I said, "Wow." And then he said, "But my wife's the politician, and here she comes." This was 15 years ago. So in the next month, they invited me over for dinner. I got there at 6, and at 11:30 at night, 5.5 hours later, I shook hands with him and said, "This is the beginning of an entertaining conversation." And then I introduced Jane Ellen to Ruth Asmunson, and Jane Ellen helped Ruth get elected. She was one of her campaign co-chairs. So for 8 years, Jane Ellen was very active in Davis politics. Terry got appointed to the Davis Planning Commission, and after 4 years, he had done such a good job that the city manager begged him to serve another 4 years on the Davis Planning Commission, and he did. So he spent 8 years on the Davis Planning Commission. He knows a great deal about Davis, and I'm done.
No, it's 10 years.
Oh, 10 years. Okay, I'm sorry.
Sign language, 10.
Good for you. Okay, I'm done with the introduction. Let's go back to square one. You started out in Sacramento as a little boy. Talk about growing up.
Well, I grew up in Sacramento, yeah. I was born and raised there. I even know the house number of where I was born. I grew up in Sacramento, and so I was quite familiar with this area from birth, and especially from, say, high school, when the football teams were coming over to Woodland and Davis and every place to play football. So I was familiar with the area quite a bit. But I probably am forgetting how I wanted to introduce the beginning. But what happened was I kind of figured that people would probably want to know how I got from being a rocket scientist to being on a planning commission, or got involved or even got interested. So I thought I'd go back to that part.
Okay.
And say, this is kind of the sequence that got me involved. When I went to college, the first thing I wanted to be was a doctor, but I got talked out of that after my entrance exam. So I said, okay, I'm going to be a civil engineer. So the first year I started school, junior college, Sacramento Junior College. It was to be a civil engineer. However, then I went in the service, and while I was in the service, we had atomic fission So then I came home and said, there's the energy of the future. So I became a physicist major. And my thought was that someday I would go into nuclear physics to the point where, with engineering, I'd be designing nuclear plants for atomic energy. So that didn't happen. What happened was I got married. Now, this started saying, then I started saying, well, I have to earn a living. So I took the first available job that looked really good to me, and that was Aerojet, working on missiles. And I worked on the Titan and the Vanguard there. And then I left there after a couple of years and went out to Utah to work on the first stage Minuteman for 6 years. And then I went down to the Cape for a while, but that was just to do with launching of the missiles that I'd been working on. And then I came back to Sac State, and I wanted to get another year of education. So I went to Sac State, and then I went down to Lockheed, and I worked for Lockheed for 25 years. And that was all missile work and space work. I was in Lockheed Missiles and Space Division. So I got very involved in mostly missiles, electronics, space communications, and so forth. I could give, if I had 2 hours to talk, it would be easier to explain all of this. But it would be, and I always figured that it's easy to talk for 10 minutes and it's easy to talk for 2 hours, but trying to talk in between there, like for a half an hour or an hour, that's the hard part. So anyway, while I was down there, I married Jane Ellen Whittier. She was a teacher in the Sunnyvale school district, and so we bought a townhouse in Sunnyvale. And since we were one of those who bought into it before it was finished, the builders were still the board for the homeowners association. But when they got 51% ownership, then they were supposed to turn it over to the homeowners. So at the meeting where the builders presented, we're going to have we're going to turn this over to the members, and you will run your own homeowners association. Somehow, I got involved to the point where I was elected to the board, and then the board appointed me as the first chair. So I was the chair of the planning commission, chair of the homeowners association, and did that for a year. And during that year, got pretty involved in studying the documents and finding out that we had to work with the city. There were a lot of things the city required of us. We had to turn over copies of who the members were, their elected positions, copies of our documents and all this stuff. So then I started communicating with the city. I thought it would be a good idea to get off of the board. So I said the second year I didn't want to be on the board again, time for somebody else. But after 1 year off, I said I need to get back on again. So then I got back on the board, and I was on the board, I think, for 17 years. And I was the president for probably over half of that. But there were so many things involved with the documents that I started going to the homeowners association, what they call it, the California Association of Homeowners Associations. So we started going to these conventions and finding out a lot of things about documents, CC&Rs, bylaws,
CC&Rs?
CC&Rs. Conditions, covenants, and restrictions.
Conditions, covenants, and restrictions.
Pardon me if I use shortcuts. It comes naturally. It's like people used to say townhouses and condominiums, and they thought there was a difference. They're all CIDs. Community interest yeah, I got involved with that, and meanwhile, Jane Ellen was involved with the city to the point where she got herself elected to the Arts Commission and turned around and told me how much, and she enjoyed going to the meetings. So a year later, I put in for the Planning Commission. I was interviewed by the City Council, and I was put on the Planning Commission.
For the city of Sunnyvale.
For the City of Sunnyvale. Now, the most important thing I learned there was I sat down in my seat, and the first few meetings, I thought, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to vote. I don't know how to study to determine how I want to vote. And I kind of depended on the guy next to me, and I subconsciously I said, I'm going to vote however he votes because he's been on this commission for a while and he knows what he's doing. But then the City of Sunnyvale has a requirement that if you're appointed to the Planning Commission, and you promise to do this, if you're on the Planning Commission, the first year you must go to the Planning Commissioners Institute. All expenses paid.
Now, who sponsors the Planning Commission Institute?
That comes from the League of California Cities. It's one of their divisions. They have legislative divisions and I've forgotten, a whole bunch of them. But Planning Commissioners Institute is one of the most important. They have their meetings every year, and they alternate Northern and Southern California. The northern is in Monterey at the Doubletree. Beautiful convention center. You can stay at the Monterey, and if you do, you don't even have to go out if it's raining. They're connected, and it's a marvelous thing to attend. But the most important part of that is they have a basic course that you go through in the 3 days that you're there that tells you all of the fundamental things that you need to know as a basic planning commissioner. When I came back, I was so much more effective that I said, hey, I'm going to go again next year because there must be a whole lot more things I can learn. All these other different sessions going on at the same time, I was going through this basics that I was curious about, but knew I had to get the basics first. So that the city sent me 4 years. All 4 years I was on the Planning Commission, they sent me every year and paid my expenses to go. And every year I came back knowing more and looking forward to the next year. I went back with the questions I wanted to resolve from going. They have joint meetings where planning commissioners just sit down and discuss what problems have we had and how did we solve them. And so people get a chance to say, here's a situation we ran into. Does anybody else have one like that? And what did they do? And you learn so much from things like that. After I came to Davis, I had no intention of ever being on a planning commission again, but Jane Ellen got on the election committee with Ruth Asmundson. Ruth was coming over to the house to talk to her, and she found out I had been on the planning commission in Sunnyvale. In Sunnyvale. So she started asking me some questions, and then she said, I really need to get you on the planning commission. So I thought about it and thought, well, yeah, I guess I'd do this. I wanted to get to know people in Davis and get more familiar with it. So I said, okay, I'll apply. Well, I immediately ran into some things that I didn't understand. The City Council of Davis, City Council members do not interview the Planning Commission. They look at the paperwork and try to judge, is this going to be a good planning commissioner from what they see on the paper? I had no interview. I never met any of the City Council members.
I think now I believe Lucas and Brett are the subcommittee that interviews every applicant for a commission.
That's a very good start. When I was interviewed, it was all of the City Council. They were all going to vote. Well, they all were at the interview.
Well, but wasn't that a council meeting?
No,
Okay,
no, that was they called you into a conference room
okay,
one at a time.
okay.
And you just had an appointment to go in, and they interviewed you for a while, whenever, and then somebody else would go in and they interview the next person.
Well, it's personnel, so they can do it in closed session without the public there.
Yeah,
It is a personnel decision.
yeah. So I felt a lot better about that, but in Davis they didn't do that, and I wondered, what do you say to people that on a piece of paper that would give them some insight as to what your personality is, and whether you get along with people well and if you communicate well and so forth. But they didn't do that here, and I was surprised. So anyway, I was selected by a vote of 4 out of 7
In Sunnyvale.
In Davis.
In Davis, there are 5.
Pardon. I was thinking, I just got a bare majority,
Okay.
and the strange thing was, after the very first planning commission meeting that I had in Davis, Mike Harrington, who was a city councilman then, he sat through the whole thing, and as we were leaving, he came out, caught me outside, and he says, if I'd known how good you were, I would have voted for you too.
Good.
And I thought that was a good feeling, that at least I was making some sense while I was there.
Well, that was the very beginning.
That was the very beginning. Now, I did want to go to the Planning Commission from Davis because I had accumulated some questions I wanted to find out
The Planning
about.
Commission Institute.
It's called an academy now.
Right, but the point is, what you said was I wanted to go to the Planning Commission.
Oh, I wanted to go to the Planning Commission Institute.
Right.
Because I had accumulated some questions.
That are unique to Davis. Now,
Yeah.
This is the Davis General Plan for 2001, and I've written 1974 because there are no new ideas in the last 35 years in this document. The 1974 General Plan is what the 2001 General Plan is. And so there are many things about Davis that are completely different from all the other cities in the state of California. And because most planning commissioners have never been to the Monterey Institute, most of them think that this is a good document. This document is not a good document. I know a lot about this document.
I knew a lot about the one in Sunnyvale, too. The most important thing that I could relate to that is, while I was in Sunnyvale, I also got in a program called Leadership Sunnyvale. And this is a 10-month course of having nightly sessions, all-day sessions where you tour something, like the police department. You spend all day and you sit in a conference room and the police give you all the background information about, problems that they have and how it's run and what they do. And then you go to all these different, let's say...
Public Works?
Yeah, we even toured the filtration plant and stuff like that. And so we learned a lot about the city and a lot about communication. We had all these courses where, they have lecturers come in to give you training in how to work together, how to be a good moderator in a meeting, things like that. I took that course, and my wife was in it before I was. She was in it the year before I was, and their major concern was education, and that was their project. Our project was something else. But we always had a project to work on, and at the end of the year, we gave our conclusions in a theater, like the Varsity Theater downtown. They had a theater on Old Murphy Street, the old downtown of Sunnyvale, and we presented to whoever wanted to come of the city and all the city members what the results of our project were. When I came here, I thought that was very useful, and so I wanted to be able to use it, some of that information. So I got involved so much with all of this stuff and studying CCNRs, and I could go into an awful lot of that stuff because our CCNRs, for instance, when I was first in the homeowners association, said that there was nothing in there about doing anything with roofs, and that's a homeowners association responsibility, a common roof, and so we had no capital savings for when the roofs needed replacing. That had to be a special assessment, and it was not easy for everybody in the 76 units that we had to cough up $2,500 to go put on a roof because we didn't save for it when it needed to be replaced. So this is one of the deficiencies, I thought, when I was on the planning commission here, was that planning commissioners weren't given the CCNRs to study and see if they were sufficient for the project. That was supposed to be a legal thing. Well, it's the legal people that draw them up. And if they can't see what a user is going to run into from that attitude, they're not going to have a very good CCNR.
So I make the distinction between a bird's eye view and a worm's eye view. The city looks down from the top. They've got this image of the map of the city of Davis in their head, and you're just a spot on the map. Where when you look at from a worm's eye view, when you're the person, the city is this great big thing, and it's a real problem. So half of the communication problem is because the institution is so big, and the people that represent the institution are only representing the institution, where the individual is stuck and has to deal with the consequences. I mean, that's what we call politics today.
Yeah. When you started, I was thinking of something to go back to, but
well, talk about the orientation class.
Oh, let me bring this
Go
up.
ahead. Talk about whatever you want.
When I was in Leadership Sunnyvale, and that was the reason I brought it up.
Okay.
When I was in Leadership Sunnyvale, one of the things they did was have all the previous mayors who were still alive come in and tell us about the things that were happening in their city when they were the mayor and how they handled different things. And I was really amazed at some of these who said, we have a zoning map in which we had laid this and this and this out, and we had people come in, developers, who wanted to do this and this and this, but if they didn't fit, we just said, no way. And they would say, but, and then we would say, look, you don't like what our general plan is, go next door. And I was amazed. They just said, take your business elsewhere. If you don't want to do it our way, go to Mountain View, go someplace else and do it. And I thought, that is how Sunnyvale really had such a firm grasp of everything in its place. And I mean, all the industry was out in the industrial area. And you could provide for transportation to and from the residential areas. And all the city parks, of course, were laid out in the convenient places. The kids didn't have to cross any major thoroughfares. All the major thoroughfares were planned so that you didn't have a bunch of driveways coming out into them. They thought of all these things. They also thought of things like 25 years ahead of time, they thought of taking the treated wastewater, piping it back into the city for all of these parks and everything to have landscape water that didn't come from the water that they had filtrated for your use. And I thought, they did that way ahead of time before this got all built up over them. That's what I think future leadership is. When you can look into the future and see things like that and say, we need to provide for this. We even, when I was on the planning commission, we're planning for solar shade, solar
Collection?
protection,
Okay.
so that if somebody had solar panels, which we effectively said someday we're going to have a bunch of solar panels, no building could go next to them on the south
So
side.
to protect the
And-
sun exposure.
Right, and when somebody was trying to put something in, one of the things they had to do was tell us, summer and winter, what is the shade line on the property next door? So that we could ensure that it wasn't going to effectively block out somebody else's solar pattern. So this is what it takes for when you're looking for something for the future and you want to put it in here. You have to effectively look into the future and say, how do we want to do our general plan that is going to protect not us, not the person living there now, but the people who are yet to come? And that essentially is what a planning commissioner's job is. To say, this is the city I want to leave behind because I'm planning for those who are yet to come. And I don't know, I can remember there was just one house that had put in a beautiful white, painted white, wrought iron fence in the front of their house, around the front of their house. But it was in a residential area that said you couldn't build a fence in that close to the sidewalk. And so it came to the planning commission to give them a deviation. And we said no, that we have plans. When you applied for your permit, they didn't. They built it. Said, when you then applied for your permit, because somebody complained, and the neighborhood enforcement people went out and looked, they said, you have to have a permit. When they applied for that permit, belatedly, the planning commission said, no way. You violated our ordinances, and you're going to have to do something. So they took it to city council approved it. So now it's the only fence on that whole street because the city council allowed that deviation.
Yeah.
One of the things here, when I first came to Davis and got on the planning commission, they gave me this zoning map. And all I could see was PUD, PUD, PUD all over the place.
And what does PUD mean?
Planned unit development. Every time somebody wanted to put a garage a little too close to the fence line, or move the house over a little bit so it encroached on the side leeway. It seems like there were somebody always in the planning commission, planning staff, city council would permit all of these things, and they called it a PUD. So here were all these PUDs in violation of all the different zoning areas. And I thought, and I talked to Bill Emlin. And I said,
who's Bill Emlin?
Bill Emlin was then the, what do you call it?
Community development.
Community development.
And then the city manager.
Yeah. And he said, yeah, I said, before we came, this is the way it was being done. And so we've got all these things. And my biggest thing is, I was on the losing end on a vote of, 6-1 many times. For instance, at 10th and F Street,
Okay.
we had a situation. I was only on the planning commission for about a year. We had this instance where a corner lot wanted to divide his lot into two pieces, subdivide, keep the little house on the corner, build a 2.5-story house behind it. He wanted to live in the new house, which also fronted on F Street, which I complained because you put another driveway on a kind of a major street going north and south.
It's the arterial.
Huh?
It is.
It's an arterial.
Yeah.
And they were adding a driveway there, and then they were going to sell the little corner piece with the little house on the corner. So to the planning commission, I brought this court case which said, the state has said that you may not do a subdivision against the zoning ordinance for the profit, for the profit, or what's another word, for the advantage of a single person, of one person. It must be for the community's benefit, not a person's benefit. And I brought the court case in which one of these exact same things had happened and been reversed by the court, and presented it to the Planning Commission and went down on a 6-1 vote. They approved it. So we've got this house that looked like it's 3 stories there now, with a driveway right on, almost on the sidewalk, right out, coming right out into F Street. And I thought, no wonder we've got so many PUDs in this city.
And when the Davis did the 72-74 general plan, before that, we were a standard zone city. So R6 meant residential 6,400 square feet lot. R8 meant 8,000 square foot lot. And if you look in West Davis, you'll see that pattern, that in the residential housing outside of Anderson, a lot of those houses were built by Bill Strang. There are R6 and R8. But in the 74 general plan, they went to planned development. So they would talk about a whole development. It would have a residential part, it would have a commercial part, it might have a park or a place for a church or something like that. And then it became a PD. And so it says PD 73-1, PD 74-12.
Yeah.
And then they had growth control. And I'll just insert this in terms of why the Davis general plan became the way it did. And at that point, every year the city council would have a meeting and the developers would line up and the city council would make a list. And then when they got to the bottom line of we're only going to allow 450 units to be built this year, they would say, well, we're only approving half the developers this year. And then the other half would complain in the meeting. The city council would cave in. They would approve 1 or 2 more of the developments beyond what they'd agreed to for and they did this every year. And it was all politics. And then the next year, the people that had been rejected were at the top of the list. And so that's how they slowed the growth in Davis, was the approval process got lagged. But then in 1984, we didn't have any lots available for sale. And that kicked off the process for the 86-87 general plan, which led to Mace Ranch, Mace Ranch, South Davis, and some of West Davis and North Star. So that was the last time we had the kind of growth that led to Measure R and Measure J and Measure R. Now citizens have to vote, as on Nishi, before a project can be approved. Nishi was defeated by a close vote. We have not had a development since Measure J was put on the ballot.
Right.
I believe in 2004? No, 2000. So I want you to go back and talk about the Academy, the Monterey League of Cities Academy for Planning Commissioners. You've got listed what it is that's in the basic program, and I just want people to understand what it is that they get trained about.
Well,
that Davis Planning Commissioners do not understand.
yeah, I did print out what they really want people to understand, and it comes under the title of How to Be an Effective Planning Commissioner. Let me interject one other thing. When I was in Sunnyvale, we had a planning commission meeting every Monday. The first and third Mondays were devoted to study sessions, and the second and fourth were formal meetings. Now, the studying sessions we went to were open to the public. We were all there, and the developers would bring preliminary plans to us and say, this is what we want to do. How do you think this would fit in? Would this fit in the city? And, would you approve this type of thing? And we'd say, well, yes, but you got to have more of a setback, or you got to put a berm in here to hide, and then we'd approve it. or this is 3 stories or more. If you put in an elevator, then it would be okay. We would make these comments, and they would be kind of an unofficial study of this thing, and we'd be giving advice. You do this, and we'll be much more readily receptive to approving this project. So I really appreciated that. I really effectively enjoyed going to those study sessions. It gave us a back and forth communication of what's good and what's bad. The 5th Monday, which we have 5 of in the year, was a study session for the planning commissioners, which staff put on, and they would say, okay, we're going to study roofing. They would bring in some roofers. The roofers would bring all of their materials in. They would bring in samples of cementitious material of the different kinds, or a metal roofing, or they would bring in composition roofing, and we would have a study session, and they would tell us, this is the good points about this. It will last so long. These are the good conditions and the bad conditions, and we had study sessions on all these different things. One time they brought in architects, and architects taught us about the different structural things, about whether the roof is 45 degrees or 30 degrees or whatever. And they would go through structural things, and they would also tell us about articulation. How can we articulate by moving the walls, or putting something this way or that way, or the different way we can paint it or put different materials on. So we learned about articulation and how to keep from having just a big blank wall down the street, you know. So
give me another word for articulation.
Well, break up the monotony.
Okay, variety is part of it.
Variety, yeah.
The visual dynamic.
Right.
Have it not be static.
Right. You get a good example of articulation, I think, if you look at these new townhouses that they're building out at the cannery, because they're different colors, their roof line is different. They look like, this one doesn't look like this one in color, texture, roof configuration. They're all different, so that you know that this must be the dividing wall between these two, and they all look much too narrow to me. I thought something like that, and I tried to talk it up when I first was on the planning commission here, but I didn't get very far. They don't seem to be as interested in educating the planning commissioners for all these different nuances of being a planning commissioner.
Well, you know, it's one of the problems that we have in America we call exceptionalism. You know, that only America does it right and nobody else.
Oh.
Well, Davis has that too, especially with this sacred general plan that there's no other city in the state that follows the Davis general plan. In 1974, we were historic. In 1974, we did so much energy conservation that the 1990 California construction code is based on the Davis 1974 general plan. But the state construction code got changed so much that by 1990, Davis didn't have to have any exceptions in the state construction code anymore, because the state construction code was now consistent with all the innovation that Davis had done. And Davis has done no innovation since then. We've just become another suburban city. I went to a conference on cities in 2000. It was in Toronto. They didn't even know that Davis existed. You know, it used to be it was a place where Rosalind Carter and Francois Mitterrand came because they wanted to see what Davis was like. People come on their bicycle. We're the bicycle capital of the northern Central Valley, except for Chico. Chico's got a much better bike plan than we do, and they're involved in their bike plan. I have a lot of problems with this general plan from start to finish, and I'm just going to say one thing now, and then I want you to come back to the basic training. The problem with the Davis general plan is it's too fragmented. We need a systems approach. looking at housing and looking at transportation and looking at land use leaves out the people. 90% of what the city of Davis has to deal with, how the government is organized, how the city is organized, how the economy works or doesn't work, is outside the general plan. When this general plan process started in 1990, I wanted computers and youth and seniors. Those things are all left out of this general plan. There's nothing about economic development in this general plan. This is an anti-economic plan. It does a terrible job with the downtown. It does a terrible job with businesses. The city of Davis is very proud at stopping businesses. The city of Davis does not have the capacity. There is nobody on the city staff that a business person can go to and feel like they have a friend. The people in the city of Davis are only regulators. There are no entrepreneurs on the city of Davis staff. The economic development staff are bureaucrats. They will tell you no. They will not tell you yes. They will not tell you how to get something done. They are interested in following the bureaucracy, not in having the economy work. Now that's the main thing I want to say. That's the main reason why we need a charter. The general plan, this general plan destroys the city of Davis economy. We are behind in taxes. We have to pay more taxes than most cities do, and it's because we don't have sales tax revenue. I'm going to stop now. Talk about the orientation for freshman planning commissioners. Talk about the
Okay. There's one thing that I particularly think of in what you were saying was that effectively what we really need to have are really good, responsible city council members. And the only way we can get those is by having really effective, forward-thinking citizens who are voting for them. And to give you an example, and it always comes to mind when I think of a good city council, the city of Bell. The city of Bell is the one, do you recall this?
I think I do,
The city manager had upped his pay to something like $500,000 a year.
I thought it was more like $750,000, but
well, that's including benefits and stuff.
Okay.
And all of the people that he was in charge of were getting these tremendous raises, and nobody seemed to be paying any attention until suddenly the city was broken. Now what do we do? And then it all fell apart. But I blame that on the citizens who were not looking at what was going on. They weren't keeping up. Well, we need a new city charter. I mean, a city charter or a new plan. They're not thinking of that when they vote for a city council member. And it seems to me that city council members ought to be running on something as important as that. That's how you run the city, is by having a good general plan and following it. Anyway, how to be an effective planning commissioner. And this comes from the Planners Academy. This is what you go for. Understanding your role. One of the basic things is, what are you there for?
And what does that mean? So say what the questions are and then answer them.
Yeah, so you can make the decisions based on the city codes. You have to be informed. You have to be able to study those and say, oh yeah, I can vote for this because this meets our codes, our ordinances. You have to know things like the Brown Act, what you can and can't do, or you get in trouble. Commissioners need to have a good thick skin. It's like being a politician, and I think Hillary Clinton is the one who said, oh, I'm used to that. They get criticized all the time about something. Nobody can do everything right. You have to be effective at meetings. You have to be able to say what you need to say, ask the questions you need to ask. That brings up an aside. One night I was asking a bunch of questions about a project on the Planning Commission, and the chair wanted to cut me off, and I said, let me explain. The people who are watching from home have not seen what I have in my staff report. I am asking those questions to make those people informed as to why I'm going to vote the way I'm going to vote. So I want to ask these questions so they will understand what is the information we have in making this decision. So I went on with my questions. Anyway, you have to be effective at the meetings. You have to come prepared, which I really thought was very important. If you have a minority opinion, you have to have some real thing. If you're going to sway the other commissioners at all, you have to have something really substantial that will make the other commissioners say, oh yeah, I haven't thought of that. And this is the kind of things that you learn. You have to have a very good planning commission staff relationship. There has to be a really good, effective communication. And the chair is very important in that respect, because it's the chair's responsibility to make sure that every planning commissioner who gets on there is effectively trained and able to do the job of being an effective planning commissioner. That's his role. He doesn't just sit there and say, yes, you may speak or not. Of course, one of the things in a planning commission, good planning commissioner has to be able to do is how to say no, and how to effectively do it without making anybody feel offended, especially if the public says anything about one of your projects or whatever. But I've got in the back of my mind, I've been on this planning commission in Davis for about a year, and I went to a reception at Mondavi, and Lois Wolk was there, and I was kind of in awe of her anyway. So I didn't say anything, but I was fairly close to her, and she looked at me and she said, I've been watching you on the planning commission. And that kind of, I didn't know what to say. And I said, how am I doing?
Good for you.
And she said, I think you're much too sane to be on the Davis Planning Commission. And I took that as, wow, I must be doing okay on the Davis Planning Commission.
Well, Lois is a pretty sane person, so that was a compliment.
Yeah, I took that as a great compliment. One of the two greatest compliments I've had.
So what's the other one?
I think it was when Bill Emlyn said, we need you on the Planning Commission.
I agree.
The city, I've been on the Planning Commission for about, I went through the first 4 years, and then I went to go back on it, and I talked to Bill, and he said, yes, but then I had a 2-year stint. I filled in for somebody else. They put me in a slot for somebody else.
I see.
And I had a 2-year stint. Well, that turned out to be very fortunate, because when they went to the city clerk, Zoe, she said, yeah, effectively you're eligible for 2 more 4-year terms. So I went to Bill Emlyn and said, do you think I should put in again? He says, we need you on the Planning Commission. You're the only one who really effectively knows what CCNR is and what they should say, etc., and some other things. And I thought, yeah, that was a really good compliment coming from Bill Emlyn. And I'll say it, I think Mike Webb has come so far up from the first time I saw him in a meeting, not before I was on the Planning Commission. I went to a meeting down at the Veterans Center, and I thought, he's kind of greenhorn here.
Green, yes, he was green in '97 when he started with us.
Yeah, and so that stood out at the time, and then when he started coming to the Planning Commission and presenting and took over, I thought, my God, how much he has improved, how mature he has become, and I couldn't think of anybody who is better for this city When he left, I was disappointed. When he came back, I was delighted. I'm glad we have Mike Webb back. He's terrific.
He's now the deputy city manager
Yeah,
with
yeah.
Kelly Stackley.
I expected effectively he will make a great city manager too.
That is his career goal.
Yeah.
So, are you done with the orientation, the first year planning commission?
Let me just add one thing.
Okay.
League of California Cities.
Yes.
Every city council member should be funding themselves to go to that.
Every city council should be funding the city council members to go and the planning commissioners to go.
I do believe that wholeheartedly.
Yes.
The city will be so much more effectively informed, led, guided, if they have that kind of a background and find out what other cities are doing, absorbing all of that information they can get and bring it back to Davis and say, effectively, here's a good idea, I think we need to incorporate it here and use it here in Davis to get us forward faster and better. No more individual PUDs all over the zoning map and stuff like that.
So I'm going to close now with what I was going to open with.
Okay.
And that's two controversial statements. Pam Gannell was the chair of the Planning Commission about the time that, were you on the Planning Commission together?
No, I was not on when Pam was.
Okay.
She was on before I was, I think.
Okay. So this is a story from just before Terry was on the Planning Commission, but it's still true today because it's when this general plan was brand new, she was the Planning Commission chair, and she went to the Monterey training. She's the only person from the City of Davis Planning Commission that I know has been to the Monterey training. And after she came back, she came up to me at a business and she said, John, I went to Monterey and you were right. The Planning Commission is supposed to help the Davis economy, not stop it. So that's the mentality, that's the reason why there were a lot of 6-1 votes. That Terry was saying the economy is something that we have to help. Every city council I know of, except the Davis City Council, devotes most of its time to economic development and infrastructure to support the entire city. That's not true in Davis, and I think Davis suffers from it immensely. Now, that's not just about economic development, that's also about the community and building the society. We have the ecology and we need to be respectful of it. But we need to learn to live within the economy in ways that we're failing. The best example I can give you of what I mean is, at that point in time, the best chiropractic company, teaching company in the United States, Palmer Chiropractic, proposed to put a campus in the city of Davis. The Planning Commission voted 7-0, don't apply. Don't apply.
Yeah, I sat there at that meeting where the applicants for Palmer were insulted by some of the planning commissioner members and said, we don't want your kind here. And I thought, a planning commission saying that to a member of the public?
To a health provider, to an instructor.
Yeah.
In the so-called biological education center of the whole globe. We have the best university in the world, and they won't even let chiropractors learn to practice here. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was amazed at that, and I had to sit on the planning commission with a couple of the people that sat on it at that time and insulted the members of the Palmer who were applying. And they just said, go away. We don't even make an application here. We don't want your kind.
The city of Davis has been dominated by the no-growth people, the caves, the citizens against virtually everything. Most of the people that are complaining about the charter are from that 30 people that dominated the 8-year process. They should have taken 3 years. The Davis General Plan is an obsolete document. We need to move on. I propose, Terry proposes, Alex in the back room proposes, and many other people in the city of Davis are saying, let's talk about a charter.
let me add this. I called Larry Stone, who was a former mayor of Sunnyvale. He's now the Santa Clara County Assessor. I was on his campaign committee before I moved here. But I called him because he gave me such insight about cities when I was in Leadership Sunnyvale. He came and gave a lecture as a former mayor. And he gave me a statement that I wanted to bring to you and whoever's listening. He said, and this was about charter cities, pro and con. I said, what would you advocate? And he says, let me say this. And it's just one thought that I thought really stood out. The average citizen will never know the difference. But the city council will greatly appreciate having a charter city.
Now, I would add one thing to that, and that is the K people say we've got to hold the city council accountable. We can't hold the city council accountable now. A charter city, we will define how we hold the city council and city staff accountable. This is what's going on. Thanks for being on our show. Good evening.
Good night.